We are counting down 15 forgotten rifle brands that every American family once trusted. Names that hung over fireplaces, rode in the back of pickup trucks, and taught whole generations of kids to shoot straight. From the dime store 22 caliber rifle a boy earned by selling garden seeds to the lever guns that built the West, each one was woven into the fabric of American life. Then the factories went quiet, catalogs disappeared, hardware stores shuttered, and big corporations swallowed what was left. Some names survive now only as logos stamped on foreign-made imports. Others vanished completely. Which trusted American rifle sits at number 1? Let us begin the countdown with number 15. Number 15, Hamilton Rifle Company. Long before a kid could walk into a sporting goods store, there was the Hamilton, the little single-shot .22 caliber that taught half of small-town America how to shoot. Founded by Clarence Hamilton in Plymouth, Michigan. Around the turn of the century, the Hamilton was the first rifle most boys ever held. It cost almost nothing, and often it cost nothing at all. A boy could earn one by selling packets of garden seeds door to door, or by signing up subscribers to a magazine. Mail in the coupons, wait by the mailbox for weeks, and one afternoon, a long cardboard box would arrive with your name on it. Inside was a thin, light little rifle, all of $2 at retail, with a barrel barely thicker than a broom handle. It was not powerful, and it was not pretty, but it dropped tin cans off fence posts and squirrels out of oak trees, and it was yours. Fathers used it to teach trigger discipline on a quiet Sunday. Boys carried it down to the creek and came home for supper. By the 1940s, cheaper, mass-produced .22 caliber rifles from bigger makers crowded the Hamilton out, and the company faded into history. Today, the name means nothing to most Americans. But for a certain generation of farm kids, the Hamilton was the first taste of responsibility, the first thing they ever truly owned. It taught a boy that a rifle was a tool, not a toy, a lesson that arrived in a cardboard box paid for with seed money. Number 14, Quackenbush. The name sounds like a joke now, but for working families in the late 1800s, Quackenbush meant the safe, affordable rifle a parent could actually hand to a child. Henry Marcus Quackenbush built his small factory in Herkimer, New York, turning out air rifles and a clever little .22 he marketed as the safety rifle. It was simple, cheap, and forgiving, exactly what a nervous mother wanted in the house. The Quackenbush could be taken apart and tucked into a drawer, brought out for an afternoon of plinking, and put away again without ceremony. It cost only a few dollars when a day's wages were measured in cents, which put it within reach of families who could never have dreamed of a Winchester. Boys learned breath control and patience on a Quackenbush, lining up a bead sight on a paper target tacked to the woodshed. Grandfathers kept theirs oiled and ready for the rats in the corn crib. It was never a serious hunting rifle, and it was never meant to be. It was a teaching rifle, a chore rifle, a Saturday rifle. As the 20th century rolled in and larger companies flooded the market with sturdier, cheaper guns, Quackenbush quietly stepped away from firearms altogether. The name survived for a while on nutcrackers and bicycle parts, of all things, then disappeared. Few Americans today have ever heard it, but once the Quackenbush was the first rifle to teach a child that a gun demanded respect, a humble little machine that asked for steady hands and gave back a lifetime of muscle memory. Number 13, Page Lewis Arms Company. For a brief, bright moment in the early 1920s, Page Lewis was the rifle a young man saved up for. Based in Chicopee Falls, Massachusetts, the same New England valley that produced so many American guns, Page Lewis built trim, good-looking .22 caliber rifles with sporting names that promised adventure. The Sharpshooter, the Olympic, the Challenger. They were aimed squarely at boys graduating from a cheap first rifle to something they could be proud of, and at fathers willing to spend a little extra for quality their son would keep. A Page Lewis cost more than a giveaway gun, but far less than a fine sporter, landing in that sweet spot where ambition met a working family's budget. The action was clean, the lines were handsome, and a boy who carried one down to the gravel pit on a Saturday felt like he had truly arrived. For a few years, the little company punched above its weight, building rifles that rivaled the big names in fit and finish. But Page Lewis never had the scale to survive on its own. In 1926, the much larger J. Stevens Arms Company absorbed it, folded the best designs into its own catalog, and let the Page Lewis name quietly disappear. The rifles still turn up today at estate sales and gun shows, tucked in among the forgotten, and the men who recognize them grow misty-eyed. Page Lewis was proof that small American shops could build beautiful things. It just could not survive the appetite of the giants closing in around it. Number 12, Meriden Firearms Company. Here is a brand most Americans never knew they trusted because they bought it without knowing whose name was really on it. Around 1905, Sears, Roebuck & Company, already the most powerful retailer in the country, quietly bought a firearms factory in Meriden, Connecticut, so it could fill its own catalog with its own guns. For a working family on the prairie, the Sears catalog was the only store for 100 miles, and tucked among the plows and bolts of cloth were pages of rifles and shotguns. Order one, and weeks later, a Meriden-built gun arrived by rail and wagon, ready to put meat on the table. These were honest, plain rifles, made to a price, sold under a tangle of trade names so the average buyer never realized the same factory stamped them all. They armed homesteaders, tenant farmers, and townsfolk who would never set foot in a fancy gun shop. Meriden rifles hung behind kitchen doors across the Midwest, called into service against foxes in the henhouse and coyotes at the fence line. But the experiment was short-lived. By around 1918, Sears found it cheaper to simply order guns from other makers than to run its own plant, and the Meriden factory was shut down. The name vanished completely, leaving behind only the rifles themselves, scattered across the country in attics and barns. Meriden was the first sign of what was coming, a retail giant deciding it would rather control the gun on your wall than let a craftsman build it. Number 11, Hopkins & Allen. Out of Norwich, Connecticut came a name that once stood for sturdy, no-nonsense American iron. Founded in 1868, Hopkins & Allen spent decades turning out revolvers, shotguns, and single-shot rifles for families who wanted reliability without paying a premium. It was the rifle of the small farmer and the night watchman, the gun a man bought because it worked and kept working. Hopkins & Allen also did a brisk business building firearms under other companies' names, the unseen hand behind countless hardware store specials that armed the country quietly and cheaply. Their break-action, single-shot 22 caliber rifles and shotguns were as common as crows on a fence, the kind of gun nobody bragged about, but everybody owned. A boy learned to shoot on one. A father kept one loaded by the back door. The smell of its oil, the click of its action, these were the small intimacies of an American household. Then came the First World War, and with it a wave of consolidation that swept up the smaller shops. Hopkins & Allen, never richly capitalized, was bought out by the Marlin Rockwell Combine around 1917 and folded into the war effort. The Norwich plant kept running for a while under new owners, but the Hopkins and Allen name as families had known it was finished. It is almost wholly forgotten now. Yet for half a century, this unglamorous Connecticut maker put a working rifle within reach of ordinary people, asking nothing but a fair price and giving back decades of faithful service. Number 10, Noble Manufacturing Company. Mention Noble to most Americans today and you will get a blank stare. But from the early 1950s into the early 1970s, the Noble was the rifle and shotgun a hardware store owner in Haydenville, Massachusetts, sold to the family that could not justify a Winchester. Noble built honest, budget-priced guns and sold them through hardware stores, farm supply shops, and catalogs, the everyday places where regular people actually bought their tools. A Noble Pump 22 or single shot was the gun a dad picked up while buying nails and chicken wire, a practical purchase made without fanfare. They were never fancy. The bluing wore thin, the stocks were plain hardwood, and nobody pretended otherwise. But they shot true enough for rabbits and tin cans, and they cost what a working man could spare. For 2 decades, Noble guns filled gun racks across rural and small-town America, the dependable understudy to the famous names. They were the rifles handed to a kid on his 10th birthday, and the shotgun grabbed for a quick crack at a groundhog in the garden. But budget guns lived on the thinnest of margins, and as cheaper imports flooded in and the bigger companies sharpened their pricing, Noble simply could not survive. The company closed its doors in 1971 and never reopened. The guns are still out there, working away in deer camps and barns, but the name has slipped almost entirely out of memory, a forgotten New England maker that armed the families the big brands priced out. Number 9, Ivor Johnson. For more than 100 years, the name Ivor Johnson sat on the mantles of American homes, stamped on revolvers, shotguns, and the trim little .22 caliber rifles that taught countless children to shoot. Founded in 1871 by a Norwegian immigrant of the same name, the company built its reputation on safety and value, famously advertising guns safe enough to hammer the hammer. That promise mattered in a house full of kids. Ivor Johnson rifles like the Target Master and the Lil Champ were exactly the sort of gun a parent trusted, affordable, reliable, and forgiving of small hands still learning the rules. They were the rifle leaned in the corner of the mudroom, the one carried out to the back 40 on a frosty morning, the one a grandfather pressed into a grandson's hands with a few quiet words about always pointing the muzzle at the ground. The company moved over the decades, from Massachusetts down through New Jersey and finally to Arkansas, chasing lower costs as the American gun industry slowly came apart. Each move chipped away at the old quality, and the once proud name limped through the 1980s before the original company finally collapsed in the early 1990s. The brand has been resurrected since by other owners, but the Ivor Johnson that generations of families actually trusted, the one built by the company the founder started, is gone. What remains is a logo, sold and resold, a ghost of the maker that once promised a nervous mother her son's first rifle would be safe. Number 8, high standard. When a serious shooter wanted accuracy without a custom shop price, the answer for decades was high standard. Founded in 1926 in Connecticut by a talented gunmaker named Carl Swabilius, the company earned a reputation that few American makers ever matched. Its .22 caliber target pistols were good enough for Olympic shooters and FBI agents alike. But High Standard built rifles too, and its rim-fire sporters, like the Sport King, put that same precision in the hands of ordinary families. A High Standard .22 was the rifle a man bought when he cared about the group on the paper, the one he used to teach his kids that a good shot came from a steady hold and a clean trigger pull, not from luck. Quietly, High Standard also built guns for Sears, putting its quality inside catalog rifles that families never knew were special. For nearly 60 years, the company turned out firearms that punched far above their price, beloved by marksmen who knew exactly what they were getting. But the firearms business is brutal, and changing ownership, rising costs, and a flood of competition wore the old company down. In 1984, the original High Standard went bankrupt and closed. The name was later picked up by a different company in Texas, but the Connecticut maker that earned the trust, the one whose rifles and pistols won matches and protected agents, was finished. High Standard was proof that an American factory could deliver world-class accuracy to the everyday shooter. Then the lights went out, and the family that owned one held on to it a little tighter. Number 7, J.C. Higgins. No name on this list was found in more American homes than J.C. Higgins, and almost nobody realized it was never a gun maker at all. From 1946 into the early 1960s, J.C. Higgins was the house brand of Sears Roebuck, named, the story goes, after a longtime Sears accountant. For millions of families, the Sears catalog was Christmas itself, the great wish book that arrived in the fall, its corners folded down by kids dreaming over the rifle pages. And under that tree on Christmas morning, wrapped in brown paper, was a J.C. Higgins 22 or a J.C. Higgins shotgun, a real gun at a price a regular family could manage. What most buyers never knew was that the finest makers in the country built these guns. High Standard, Marlin, Savage, and others quietly stamped the J.C. Higgins name on their work for Sears. So a family that thought it was buying a cheap catalog gun was often getting a quality rifle in disguise. These guns taught a whole post-war generation to shoot, leaned against the porch rail, carried into the deer woods, passed from father to son. Then around 1962, Sears retired the name, replacing it first with the Ted Williams line and later with simply Sears. The J.C. Higgins name was gone, but the guns remain everywhere, still shooting, still trusted, their secret pedigree finally appreciated by collectors. J.C. Higgins was the rifle America actually grew up with, the wish book gun under the tree, ordinary and beloved, and now a name only the gray-haired remember. Number 6, Western Field. If your family shopped at Montgomery Ward instead of Sears, and millions did, then the gun in your closet probably said Western Field. Ward's, the great rival to Sears, ran its own catalog empire, and its house brand of rifles and shotguns went by the name Western Field. Like its competitor, Ward's did not build these guns. It ordered them from the best in the business. Mossberg, Savage, Stevens, and others made Western Field rifles to Ward's specifications, then stamped them with the catalog name. So the family that drove into town to the Montgomery Ward store or mailed in an order from the farm was often carrying home a quality American rifle wearing a different label. A Western Field bolt-action .22 caliber was the workhorse of countless rural households, cheap enough to buy alongside the work boots and the Seacorn, good enough to last a lifetime. It hung in the kitchen, rode in the truck, and went out at dawn after rabbits and crows. For generations, Western Field and J.C. Higgins were the two pillars of catalog gun America, arming the working families that the high-end shops overlooked. But the great catalog empires could not survive the age of the big box store and the discount chain. Montgomery Ward declined for years and finally closed for good in 2001, taking the Western Field name with it. The rifles soldier on in deer camps to this day, but the brand that sold them and the wood-floored department store that stood behind it has passed into memory. Number 5, J. Stevens Arms. Before there was a single famous American sporting rifle, there was Stevens, the company that, more than any other, taught the nation to shoot. Founded in 1864 by Joshua Stevens in Chicopee Falls, Massachusetts, J. Stevens Arms built the affordable single-shot .22 caliber rifles that became, quite literally, the boys' first rifle for generations. The favorite, the crack shot, the visible loader. These were not expensive guns. A Stevens favorite could be had for around $6 in its heyday, but they were beautifully made, tack-driving little rifles that a boy treasured and a man never quite outgrew. For decades, when an American father decided his son was old enough, the rifle he reached for was a Stevens. It came down off the wall, the boy was walked out behind the barn, and a lifetime of shooting began with the crisp report of a Stevens .22 and a tin can flipping off a stump. The company also built rugged shotguns and rifles that armed working families coast to coast, becoming one of the largest firearms makers in the world. But in 1920, the much larger Savage Arms bought J. Stevens Arms, and the proud old company became a brand inside someone else's catalog. The Stevens name still appears today on budget guns sold by Savage, But the independent Massachusetts maker that taught America to shoot, the original J. Stevens Arms, has been gone for over a century. Few names did more to put a first rifle in young hands, and almost no one remembers it stood alone. Number 4, Harrington and Richardson, for the family that wanted one honest gun that would never let them down and never break the bank. The answer for over a century was H&R, founded in 1871 in Worcester, Massachusetts, by Gilbert Harrington and William Richardson. The company became the great democratizer of American firearms, the maker whose guns ordinary people could always afford. The H&R Topper, a simple break-action single-shot shotgun, put a fall harvest of game in countless freezers. The handy rifle did the same for deer hunters who could not justify a fancy bolt gun. And H&R's single-shot .22 caliber rifles armed more first-time shooters than almost anyone could count. These were not safe queens, they were tools. The gun behind the kitchen door, the one in the truck, the one a father handed his daughter with a nod toward the woods. H&R also stepped up when the country needed it, building M1 Garands under contract during war and earning a place in American history. But the budget firearms business ran on razor margins, and the original H&R closed its doors in 1986. The name was revived, passed to new owners, eventually swept into the Remington empire, and when that empire collapsed in 2020, the H&R brand was sold off again in the wreckage. The company that put a reliable gun in the hands of every American who needed one is gone. The toppers still hang in mudrooms across the land, faithful as ever, but the maker that built them has dissolved into other people's portfolios. Number 3, Marlin. For a century and a half, if you didn't carry a Winchester, you carried a Marlin, and plenty of families swore the Marlin was the better gun. Founded in 1872 by John Marlin, the company became Winchester's great rival in the lever-action rifle, the two of them defining what an American deer rifle looked like. The Marlin Model 336, with its side ejection and solid top receiver that took a scope with ease, rode in pickup trucks and deer stands from Maine to Montana. The little Model 6022 became one of the most produced rifles in the history of the world, with well over 10 million made. The rifle taught a second post-war generation to shoot. A Marlin was the gun a man bought to last his whole life and then hand to his son. The lever's smooth throw, the bead drawing down on a buck at the edge of a frozen field, these were the rituals of American hunting, lived out with a Marlin in hand. Then came the corporate era. In 2007, Marlin was bought by the conglomerate that owned Remington. The storied North Haven plant was closed, and quality cratered so badly that fans bitterly nicknamed the new guns Remlins. When the whole empire went bankrupt in 2020, Marlin was auctioned off, bought by Ruger for $30 million in a bankruptcy court. Ruger has since revived the rifles, and they are reportedly excellent again. But the original Marlin Firearms, the independent company that spent 150 years building the lever gun families trusted, died in that bankruptcy. The name lives on. The company that earned it does not. Number 2, Remington Big Green, the oldest name in American firearms, and for over 200 years, the one most likely to be found in an American gun cabinet. Eliphalet Remington forged his first rifle barrel in 1816, and the company he founded grew into a giant that armed the nation through every war and every hunting season since. The Model 700 became the most trusted bolt-action deer rifle in the country, and the rifle of choice for military and police snipers. The Model 870 shotgun went into more homes and duck blinds than almost any other gun ever made. The Nylon 66, with its revolutionary plastic stock, sold over 1 million and put a nearly indestructible .22 caliber in the hands of a generation of kids. To own a Remington was to own a piece of the country itself, the rifle handed down at deer camp, the shotgun leaned in the closet, the name every American recognized on sight. Then came the slow unraveling. Burdened with crushing debt by private equity owners, battered by quality complaints and lawsuits, Remington filed for bankruptcy not once but twice. And in July of 2020, the unthinkable happened. The oldest gun maker in America was carved apart and auctioned off in pieces. The ammunition went one way, the Marlin brand to Ruger, the rifles to yet another buyer, the once mighty conglomerate simply ceasing to exist. Remington branded guns are made again today by new owners, but the company that Ella Follett started, the company that armed America for 2 centuries, was broken up and sold for parts. The greatest name in American guns became a collection of assets on a courthouse ledger. Number 1, Winchester. And at number 1 stands the rifle that, more than any other, is America, the gun that won the West. Founded in 1866 by Oliver Winchester in New Haven, Connecticut, Winchester gave the country its most iconic firearms: the Model 1873 lever action that tamed the frontier, the Model 1894 that became the best-selling deer rifle in history with more than 7 million made, and the Model 70 bolt action, so revered that hunters simply called it the rifleman's rifle. A Winchester was never just a tool, it was a birthright. The rifle passed from grandfather to son, the one carried up the mountain every November, the one that hung in a place of honor over the fireplace. The lever's distinctive clack-clack is the sound of 1,000 Western movies and 1,000,000 real American autumns. At its peak during the Second World War, the New Haven factory employed some 19,000 workers. It was an entire city built around making the rifles America trusted. And then, on March 31st, 2006, after 140 years, the New Haven plant closed its doors forever. The famous Model 94 and the traditional American-made Winchesters were discontinued. The workers were sent home. The great factory was eventually gutted and turned into apartments. The Winchester name lives on today, licensed to a Belgian-owned company that makes guns overseas and abroad, but the New Haven company that built the gun that won the West, the rifle woven into the very story of the country, is gone. When that factory fell silent, something irreplaceable went quiet with it. These 15 names tell the story of how America armed itself and how, one by one, the makers it trusted disappeared. The dime store, 22, a boy earned by selling seeds. The catalog rifle under the Christmas tree. The lever gun in the truck and the bolt gun over the mantle. They fell to corporate buyouts, foreign competition, bankruptcies, and the slow death of the catalog and the corner hardware store. Some names survive as logos on foreign-made imports. Most are gone for good, but the rifles themselves are still out there in deer camps, in closets, handed down through families who remember. If one of these names hung in your home, drop it in the comments. Tell me which forgotten rifle your family trusted, and let's keep these names alive.